There is a sketch of a bald, middle-aged man sitting in a drawer somewhere in the memory of a building in Burbank, California. The man in the sketch is nobody in particular. He is a rough shape, a placeholder, a doodle on the edge of someone's afternoon. And from that sketch, from that one quiet, unremarkable drawing, grew one of the most carefully built, most deeply loved, most enduring animated stories ever put to screen. Tonight we are going to follow that story from its very beginning. From the moment two friends sat across from each other with a half-formed idea and a shared sense that something was missing from the world of animation. From the years of research and preparation that happened before a single frame was drawn, from the first episode that aired on a February afternoon in 2005, to the moment decades later when the world fell in love with it all over again. We are going to move through this slowly. There is nowhere to be. Whatever time it is where you are, whatever weight you carried into tonight, you can put it down for a while. This story is a long one, and it deserves to be told the way it was made. With patience, with care, with the quiet belief that the details matter, even when nobody is watching. Let the music fade a little. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing find its rhythm. We are going to the beginning. In the spring of 2001, a man named Brian Konietzko was sitting at his desk at Nickelodeon Animation Studios in Burbank, California, and he picked up an old sketch he had made of a balding, middle-aged man. The drawing had been sitting in a folder somewhere, doing nothing, being nothing. Just a vague outline of a person who did not yet have a name or a world to live in. Brian looked at that sketch for a moment, and then he did something small that would echo for the next 2.5 decades. He reimagined the figure as a child. He drew the character again, younger this time, lighter, with a bald head and the suggestion of something airborne. He put flying bison in the background, great lumbering sky creatures hurtling through clouds above this small boy, and when he held the drawing up and looked at it, something in it felt right. He walked down the hall to find his friend and colleague, Michael Dante DiMartino, who everyone who knew him called Mike. These two men had met at the Rhode Island School of Design in the early 1990s. Brian had studied illustration. Mike had studied animation. They found each other the way people with complementary minds tend to find each other, through a shared shorthand, a shared set of references, a shared hunger for the kind of storytelling that did not seem to exist yet in the form they wanted it. They were both drawn to Japanese anime, to kung fu films, to Eastern philosophy, to the feeling that a story could carry real weight and real beauty at the same time. They stayed friends after graduation, ended up at the same studio in Los Angeles, and began developing the habit of talking through ideas together late into the night. When Brian brought Mike the sketch, Mike was watching a documentary about explorers trapped in the South Pole. He was watching men navigate ice and cold, and the specific kind of pressure that comes from being surrounded on all sides by a hostile environment, and he was thinking about what that felt like. He had been thinking about it for a while. The two of them sat together and began talking. They put Brian's sketch and Mike's documentary in the same room and let the collision happen. There is an air guy, they said, and water people, and maybe some fire people pressing down on them. The conversation unfolded the way good creative conversations do, not linearly, but in expanding circles. Each idea suggesting 3 more, the world building itself in real time out of things they each cared about. By some accounts, Brian had a kind of crystallizing moment during this period. While doing yoga one evening, all the ideas that had been swimming in his mind for months suddenly clicking together into something coherent. He drove to Mike's house. He spread out what he had, and the two of them understood that they were not just talking about an episode or a season. They were talking about a complete world. They pitched the idea to Nickelodeon's vice president and executive producer, Eric Coleman, and they did it in approximately 2 weeks after that first conversation. The pitch landed. In January 2002, Coleman officially approved Avatar's further development, and the work began in earnest. Brian and Mike were both deeply influenced by Hayao Miyazaki and the kind of storytelling that Studio Ghibli had built, where the fantastical and the mundane existed together without tension, where a world could be fully imagined and still feel human. They were also drawing from sources as varied as the Chinese television program Shaolin Wheel of Life, the anime series FLCL, and their own long-standing love of kung fu cinema. And they were deliberately building something different from the dominant fantasy at the time. In 2001 and 2002, Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings were reshaping popular culture, both British-influenced, both rooted in European myth and European landscape. Brian and Mike made a deliberate choice to root their show in Asian cultures, in philosophies, in martial arts, in architectures, in spiritual traditions that were far less represented in Western animation. This was not a marketing decision. It was a personal one. It was the kind of choice that people make when they are building something they actually believe in. The concept of bending grew out of this deliberate rooting in Asian philosophy. The idea that each nation would be connected to one of the four classical elements, that some individuals within each nation could manipulate that element through a form of martial practice, that the philosophy of the element would be reflected in the technique of its bending. This was not arbitrary world-building. It was a system with internal logic, built on real principles that the creators spent years studying and incorporating. By 2002, they had a series Bible, they had characters, they had a world, they had a story arc that they planned to tell across 3 complete seasons, each one called a book, each one named after an element, each one serving a distinct dramatic purpose. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is unusual. Most animated television series at that time, and honestly most animated series in general, were developed without a clear endpoint. Studios ordered seasons and waited to see if they got renewed, writing toward an open future. Brian and Mike did the opposite. They built toward a specific conclusion from the very beginning. They knew what the end of the story was before they wrote the first episode. Every seed they planted in Book 1 was planted knowing exactly when and how it would bloom. The pitch was accepted. The studio approved a pilot. The next step was animation, and for that they turned to a small studio called Tin House, which produced the pilot episode, the version of the show that convinced Nickelodeon to order a full series. After the pilot, the animation work was handed off to a new South Korean studio called JM Animation, which had been formed by a small group of former Tin House artists who had also worked on the pilot. JM Animation would go on to animate 32 episodes across all 3 seasons, alternating with DR Movie and later MOI Animation, splitting the massive workload of a show whose visual ambition exceeded almost anything else on American television at the time. DiMartino later described the work JM Animation did on the premiere episodes as, in his words, nothing short of Herculean. The studio was new, they were learning the show's visual language in real time, and they were working under production timelines that would have broken lesser teams. The fact that the first 2 episodes, The Boy and the Iceberg and The Avatar Returns, looked as good as they did was itself a small miracle. The show was originally planned to premiere in November 2004. It did not. It slipped to February 2005, and on the 21st of February of that year, in a 1-hour premiere event on Nickelodeon, the world first met Aang, and Katara, and Sokka, and Appa, and the world they lived in. 5.6 million people watched the show at its best-rated moment during that first run. It was the highest-rated animated show in its key demographic of children ages 6 to 11, and it drew audiences beyond that demographic in numbers that surprised everyone, including the people who made it. From the very beginning, adults were watching too. Parents sat through episodes with their children and found themselves still in the room when the children went to bed. The show was doing something that nobody had quite asked it to do, which was to be genuinely, uncompromisingly good at something that everyone, regardless of age, could recognize. What made those early episodes work was not just the world building or the action sequences, as impressive as both of those things were. It was the characters. Specifically, it was the quality of attention that had been paid to who those characters were before they appeared on screen. Brian and Mike had spent months developing their backstories, their relationships, their fears, and their specific forms of courage before writing a single line of dialogue for any of them. The process was not, here is a world, now who lives in it? It was closer to, here are real people, now where do they live, and what is the world that shaped them? Aang was the most carefully considered of all. He needed to be simultaneously ancient and young, carrying the accumulated wisdom and grief of every past avatar while still being genuinely and recognizably 12. He needed to be the most powerful person in the world and also the least threatening. He needed to be the avatar, a figure of cosmic responsibility, while also being someone you wanted to follow around just because he found things funny and liked to make new friends. These are not easy qualities to hold in balance in a single character, and the fact that Aang holds them throughout the entire series without either side of his nature overwhelming the other is a testimony to how well the character was conceived before he was ever voiced. Zachary Tyler Eisen was 11 years old when he was cast as Aang. He was a child voicing a child, and the result was an authenticity that older voice actors performing the same role almost certainly could not have matched. Aang's voice cracks. His laughter is genuinely unguarded. His moments of fear have a quality of involuntary vulnerability that reads as real because, in a meaningful sense, it was. Aizen was performing emotions that were at least partially continuous with emotions he was actually experiencing as a young person navigating the world. The same thinking applied to Jessie Flower, who was 12 years old when she voiced Toph. Her performance has a roughness, an edge, a casual abrasiveness that would have taken an adult actor considerable effort to produce convincingly. For Flower, it was simply the emotional register of a person her own age who had grown up being underestimated and had developed the specific kind of bravado that experience generates. She did not need to research the psychology, she knew it. This casting philosophy ran through the entire ensemble. Mae Whitman, who voiced Katara, brought a warmth and a steel to the character that coexisted in every episode. Jack DeSena, who voiced Sokka, found the precise line between comedy and sincerity that the character required, never letting the jokes tip into parody, always letting the grief underneath the humor be visible to anyone who was looking for it. Dante Basco, who voiced Zuko, was Filipino-American, and the cultural complexity of his performance, the way he inhabited a character caught between inherited identity and constructed self, had a specificity that came from genuine lived experience of navigating multiple cultural contexts. The first season was enough to convince Nickelodeon to order a second and then a third. And from that February afternoon in 2005 through the summer finale on the 19th of July, 2008, 3 years and 5 months of television unspooled into the world like something that had always been waiting there, like the memory of a place you have never actually visited but somehow know by heart. There was also, surrounding the production, a room of writers that deserves acknowledgement. Aaron Ehaus served as head writer for the series, and alongside him worked writers including Tim Hedrick, John O'Brien, and Michael DiMartino himself, who wrote or co-wrote many of the show's most important episodes. The writers' room was notably collaborative and notably ambitious. They treated the show's mythology as a system to be respected rather than bent for convenience. When they established a rule about how bending worked, they followed it. When they implied a consequence, they depicted it. When they gave a character a fear, they did not allow that fear to evaporate without being earned through narrative work. The result was a story that had the structural integrity of something written by a single author working from a complete outline, even though it was produced by a team of writers working episode by episode across a television production schedule. This is a genuinely difficult thing to achieve, and the degree to which Avatar achieves it is one of the reasons the show holds up so well on rewatch. There are no unresolved threads that were clearly abandoned, no character decisions that contradict established personality, no rules of the world that get broken for plot convenience without explanation. We are only at the beginning. If you are watching this late at night, settled into wherever you feel safe tonight, drop a comment below and tell me where you are in the world and what time it is. There is something quietly wonderful about knowing that people are listening to this from 100 different places at once, each one of them carrying their own version of why this show means something to them. And if you have not subscribed yet, it genuinely helps. It keeps this kind of content alive and it costs nothing. Now let us keep going. Before a single episode of Avatar aired, before any child sat down on a Saturday afternoon and heard Katara's voice for the first time, before any of that, there were months and then years of research. Deep, serious, deliberate research into cultures and philosophies and artistic traditions that most American animated productions never touched. Brian Konietzko and Michael DiMartino were building a world, and they understood something that many creators of fantasy worlds do not fully reckon with, which is that a world feels real not because of its fantastical elements, but because of its ordinary ones. The magic system in Avatar is extraordinary, but it is the food, the architecture, the clothing, the calligraphy on the signs in the background, the way a city is divided by class, the way a temple sits against a cliff face, that makes the Avatar world feel like a place you could actually stand in. The 4 nations were each built on a foundation of real cultural research. This was not a matter of picking aesthetic elements at random and mixing them together for visual variety. The creators genuinely engaged with the traditions they were drawing from, and they brought in consultants to ensure that engagement was respectful and accurate. The air nomads were rooted in Tibetan Buddhist monastic culture. Their robes, orange and yellow with saffron warmth, echo the colors of certain schools of Tibetan monks. Their temples, perched on cliffsides at the four corners of the world, were modeled on real Himalayan structures, including the famous Tiger's Nest Monastery in Bhutan, which clings to a granite cliff face 3,000 feet above the valley floor. The air nomads' vegetarianism was consistent with Buddhist and Hindu dietary practice. Their meditation, their commitment to nonviolence, their understanding of spiritual energy as something that flows through the body rather than something the body generates, all of it traced back to living philosophical traditions that millions of people practice to this day. When Guru Pathak teaches Aang about the 7 chakras in Book 2, he is teaching a real system. The Earth chakra, located at the base of the spine, deals with survival and is blocked by fear. The Water chakra, located in the sacrum, deals with pleasure and is blocked by guilt. The Fire chakra, in the stomach, deals with willpower and is blocked by shame. The show simplified the system to make it accessible to a young audience, but it did not distort it. A person who then goes and reads about the real chakra system would find the show's version to be a respectful, accurate summary of something ancient and considered. The water tribes drew from Inuit and Yupik cultures, as well as Australian Aboriginal and various other indigenous traditions. Their heavy fur clothing, designed for survival in Arctic cold, mirrors the anoraks and mukluks worn by Inuit peoples for generations. Their hunting practices, their relationship with ice and water as living forces rather than passive resources, their oral storytelling traditions, the presence of the boomerang as a water tribe weapon, echoing its origins in Aboriginal Australian culture, all of these details were researched and incorporated with care. The Northern Water Tribe's architecture blended Venetian canal systems reimagined in ice with elements drawn from ancient Aztec pyramids. The Southern Water Tribe's smaller, humbler structures mirrored the igloo construction of the Inuit. Even Katara's betrothal necklace, the carved pendant she wears throughout the entire series and which does not reveal its full story until episode 18 of the first season, is a detail that speaks to real indigenous traditions of jewelry as a form of cultural and personal identity. The Earth Kingdom drew heavily from Imperial Chinese culture and history. Ba Sing Se, the Great Walled City at the Earth Kingdom's heart, was modeled on the layout of Imperial Beijing, with its concentric rings of decreasing privilege moving outward from the center. The lower ring housed the poor and the refugees, the middle ring housed the merchant class, the upper ring housed the aristocracy and the royal palace. This class-stratified urban design was not invented for the show. It was the real structure of Chinese imperial cities, adapted into animation and communicated not through exposition but through production design. The buildings get grander as you move inward. The streets get wider and cleaner. The people dress better. The visual language of the city tells you everything about its power structure without a single character having to explain it. The Great Walls of Ba Sing Se were directly inspired by the Great Wall of China, and the architecture of its buildings drew from the specific stylistic traditions of the Forbidden City. The Fire Nation was built on Japanese influence, particularly from the Meiji and Imperial eras, combined with elements of Southeast Asian cultures including Thai and Indonesian design. Its architecture featured layered, curved rooftop forms associated with Japanese temple construction. Its military had the aesthetic of an industrial imperial power, with factories, steam-powered warships, coal-burning engines, and mechanized vehicles that no other nation possessed. This was deliberate. The Fire Nation's technological advancement was specifically tied to its militarism, and its industrial machinery reflected a real historical pattern. The way that technological innovation in certain societies has been channeled not toward the improvement of civilian life, but toward the development of military capability. This was a commentary on industrial imperialism that a child watching in 2005 might not have been able to articulate, but would have absorbed on a level below language. And then there is the calligraphy. Every single piece of text visible in Avatar, The Last Airbender, every scroll, every wanted poster, every shop sign, every inscription on a temple wall, every label on a container in the background of a kitchen scene is written in real, classical Chinese calligraphy, not placeholder symbols, not invented marks designed to look vaguely Asian, actual traditional Chinese characters, brushed by hand, by a cultural consultant named Dr. Yu Chen, who spent 3 seasons ensuring that a Nickelodeon cartoon had more authentic calligraphy than most live-action films set in Asia. The show never mentions this. No character points at a sign and says, "Look, real calligraphy." No behind-the-scenes featurette during the original run made it a selling point. The calligraphy is simply there, in every frame, doing its quiet work. And not only is each piece of text real, but the calligraphic style varies by nation. The Fire Nation uses a more rigid, angular script associated with official military documents. The Earth Kingdom uses a rounder, more ornate style associated with scholarship and bureaucracy. The Water Tribe's writing is sparse and practical, reflecting their oral traditions and the physical limitations of carving text into ice and bone. The Air Nomads' temple inscriptions use an archaic, flowing style that suggests great age and spiritual purpose. 4 distinct writing personalities within a single language system. All of them real. All of them brushed by hand. Almost none of them noticed by most viewers. And all of them contributing, invisibly and unconsciously, to the feeling that this world has been here for centuries, that it has a history older than anything the camera can show you. The character names carry this same deliberate weight. Aang is derived from Chinese words that can mean peaceful or soaring. Katara connects to a word meaning droplet in multiple languages. Sokka derives from a Polynesian word meaning lament, which is quietly ironic given that he functions as the show's primary source of humor but is also, underneath the jokes, the member of the group carrying the most unacknowledged grief. Toph means to expand or to support in Chinese. Zuko contains the Chinese character for ancestors. Azula derives from the Spanish word for blue, which is the color of her fire. Iroh is the word hero with its letters rearranged. These are not coincidences. They are coded descriptions of each character's nature, embedded in the thing each character is called every time someone speaks to them. It is worth pausing here to think about what the calligraphy means as a creative choice, not just as a detail, but as a statement about how the show was being made. The calligraphy did not need to be real. Viewers would never have known the difference. Nobody watching Nickelodeon in 2005 was going to pause the video and examine background signage for calligraphic accuracy. The show could have filled its backgrounds with invented marks and saved itself a significant amount of production cost and time. Instead, the creators hired a consultant, established a system of 4 distinct calligraphic styles corresponding to 4 distinct national cultures, and maintained that system across 3 seasons and 61 episodes. They did it knowing nobody would notice. They did it because the world they were building deserved real writing in it. That decision, more than almost any other single production choice, captures the philosophy that runs through the entire show. The world is real even when you cannot see it. The details are there even when you are not looking for them. The invisible architecture supports the visible world even when the visible world does not acknowledge it. This same philosophy applies to the food. The show's production team researched the cuisine of each nation and based the food depicted in the series on real dishes from the relevant cultures. Fire Nation food is spiced and warm, drawing from East and Southeast Asian culinary traditions associated with hot climates and bold flavors. Earth Kingdom food draws from Chinese regional cuisines, with particular attention to the kind of food that a large, diverse agricultural empire would produce. Water Tribe food, when you see it, is built around dried meats, fish, and the kind of practical, calorie-dense preparation that makes sense for a culture living in an Arctic environment. Air Nomad food, visible only in flashbacks and in the rare preserved sequences from temple life, is entirely vegetarian, consistent with Buddhist and Hindu dietary principles. When characters eat in Avatar, the food is culturally specific. Nobody had to make this choice. The show could have depicted generic fantasy world food and lost nothing from a narrative standpoint. Instead, every bowl and every plate and every camp meal is another layer of evidence that the world exists coherently beyond the edges of what the camera shows you. The clothing operates the same way. Aang wears the robes of a Tibetan monk. Katara wears heavy fur in a design consistent with Inuit outerwear, her clothing changing as she moves into warmer climates in books 2 and 3. Toph wears a daxushan, a type of Chinese dress that was popular during the Tang dynasty. Zuko wears garments derived from Japanese kimono and haori traditions. Each character is dressed in clothing that grows directly from the cultural context of their nation, adapted for animation but grounded in real garment traditions. The hybrid animals deserve their own quiet section. Every animal in the Avatar world is a combination of 2 real animals, and the combinations are usually strange enough to be funny, but logical enough to feel like something that actually evolved that way. Turtle ducks, platypus bears, saber-toothed moose lions, armadillo bears, flying bison, which combine the mass and gentleness of the American bison with the concept of flight. The hybridization serves a world-building function beyond comedy. It establishes that this world's biology operates on different rules than ours, that evolution here combined rather than diverged, that the relationship between species is one of synthesis rather than competition, and then there is the one animal in the Avatar world that is not a hybrid. The Earth King's pet Bosco is simply a bear, just a regular bear. Not a platypus bear, not an armadillo bear, a bear. And when Team Avatar encounters this information for the first time, their reaction is confusion and mild horror. A bear that is just a bear is the strange thing. The inversion is completely deliberate, and it is also quietly funny in a way that only works if the writers trusted that the audience had fully absorbed the rule that all animals are hybrids. The joke only lands because the rule is so established that its exception is shocking. This is the kind of trust that runs through every layer of Avatar's world building. Trust that the audience is paying attention. Trust that the details they are embedding are landing even when nobody confirms they have. Trust that a world built this carefully will feel coherent and real even to viewers who cannot name the specific reasons why. The world of Avatar does not explain itself. It simply is. And the reason it feels true is that someone spent years making it true, detail by detail, in a process of accretion so patient and so consistent that by the time you get to the third season, the world has weight. It has a history. It has rules that hold even when they are never stated. That is not something you can fake. You can either do the work or you cannot. And on Avatar, they did the work. Close your eyes if you haven't already, or let them drift. This section is about something you might know without realizing you know it. It is about the way the show sounds. Jeremy Zuckerman and Benjamin Wynn were two composers who met as students at the California Institute of the Arts, known as Cal Arts. They had both been working with computer music at a time when digital composition tools were just beginning to become widely accessible, and they were drawn to the intersection of technology and acoustic instrumentation, the place where a synthesized texture and a real played instrument could be woven together so tightly that you could not find the seam between them. They worked under the name The Track Team, and when they came to Avatar, they brought this interest in blended textures with them. The brief they were given was conceptually clear. Each nation should have its own distinct musical palette. The music should tell you where you are the way a landscape does, the way clothing does, the way architecture does. You should be able to close your eyes and know from the sound alone whether you are in the Water Tribe, the Earth Kingdom, the Fire Nation, or a place where the air nomads once lived. What Zuckerman built in response to that brief was something that went well beyond the typical animated television score. He spent time learning from musicians who were experienced with Chinese instruments, studying the specific tonal qualities and playing techniques of instruments that most Western composers had never touched. He integrated this knowledge into a scoring approach that was, at the time, genuinely unusual in American animation. The Water Tribe themes use woodwinds and percussion rooted in Inuit and Arctic indigenous musical traditions. There is a quality of cold open space in these cues, a sense of wind moving across ice, of distance and endurance. When Katara bends for the first time, when Sokka stares out at the horizon, when the Southern Water Tribe gathers at the end of a long day, the music underneath those moments carries the specific emotional weight of a culture built at the edge of the world. The Earth Kingdom themes draw from Chinese classical music. The instruments associated with these moments include the erhu, a two-stringed bowed instrument whose sound has been described as like a human voice that has learned to grieve, and the guzheng, a plucked zither with a resonance that evokes both grandeur and age. Ba Sing Se's musical language is one of scale and solidity, appropriate for a city that has never been conquered and believes it never will be. The Fire Nation uses taiko drums and brass, driving rhythms and sharp attacks. There is aggression in the Fire Nation's musical language, but there is also power and occasionally something close to beauty because the show is careful never to let the Fire Nation's music become purely threatening. Even enemy music in Avatar has shape and craft, because the show is insistent that the Fire Nation is not simply evil, but is a culture that has been perverted by a century of imperialist ideology. The air nomad music, heard only in flashbacks and in the rare moments that air temple settings appear, uses Tibetan singing bowls and bamboo flutes. It is the quietest, most interior music in the score, the sound of a culture built around meditation and spiritual practice. When Aang remembers his teachers, when he stands in the ruins of the Southern Air Temple and understands what has been lost, The music underneath those moments is the sound of something that no longer exists. It is the sound of an absence. And then there is the avatar state. When Aang's eyes glow white and the accumulated power of every past avatar moves through him, the music does something extraordinary. All four palettes converge. The drums and the bowls and the erhu and the woodwinds come together in a single layered chord that is neither harmonious nor purely dissonant, but something between the two. A chord that means everything is present at once. The show is telling you through music alone what it is also telling you visually and narratively, that the Avatar is not one person from one nation, but all people from all nations, every lifetime condensed into a single body. Zuckerman has spoken about the way he learned to approach the score as something that is always in conversation with the story. When the creators asked whether the music could come down in a certain moment to make room for a joke, or swell in another moment to carry an emotion that the dialogue could not hold by itself, he worked with those conversations rather than against them. The music in Avatar is not decorating the story. It is participating in it. The instrument sounds were not taken from generic sound libraries. They were researched and recorded specifically for the show. Azula's musical theme, her particular sonic signature, is built around a gamelan sample, a gamelan being an Indonesian percussion ensemble whose sound has a metallic crystalline quality that is unlike anything else in Western music. The gamelan felt right for Azula, Zuckerman has said, and it is right, because Azula's character has precisely that quality of cold, beautiful precision that gamelan music possesses. Her danger is not crude, it is refined, and the sound of her presence reflects that. There is a significant technical note about the series finale. The Sozon's Comet finale, the four-part event that concluded the show in July 2008, was the only portion of the original series to be scored with a live orchestra. Every other musical cue in all 3 seasons was composed and produced entirely using MIDI instrumentation, synthesized sounds that Zuckerman shaped and layered until they approximated the feel of live performance. This was a constraint of budget and time, standard for American television animation at that era. But for the finale, the budget was there, and the decision was made to record with real musicians. The result is audible. The finale sounds different from the rest of the show. It feels larger, more physical, more present. The weight of real strings and real brass and real percussion in a real room gives those final episodes a sonic authority that matches their narrative weight. It was a gift to the ending of the story, a way of saying that this moment, this conclusion that they had been building toward for 3 years, deserved the fullest version of everything they could offer. There is a technical detail about the original score that is worth knowing. Almost all of the music across the 3 seasons was created entirely using MIDI instrumentation, which means synthesized sounds shaped by computer rather than physically played by musicians in a room. This was a standard constraint of American television animation at the time, a matter of budget and production schedule. Zuckerman and Wynn became extraordinarily skilled at manipulating these digital tools to produce sounds that approximated the warmth and texture of live performance. They studied the specific acoustic properties of real instruments, the way a guzheng string vibrates slightly differently at different points along its length, the way a singing bowl's resonance changes based on the speed of the mallet circle, and they built those nuances into their digital simulations. The result, across the first 2 seasons especially, was a score that many listeners assumed was performed live because it had a specificity and a warmth that most digital scores do not achieve. The score was also designed to be flexible in a way that most television music is not. Zuckerman worked closely with the editors and creators to ensure that the music could be shaped around the beats of individual scenes rather than simply laid on top of them. In the spotting sessions where the creative team reviewed completed animation and decided where music would go and what it would do, the conversations were detailed and specific. This moment needs space. That joke needs room to breathe. This transition needs to carry the weight of what just happened into what comes next. The music was always in service of the story, and the story's needs shaped the music from the ground up. The result is a score that is inseparable from the show in the minds of anyone who grew up with it. The opening theme, with its pipa and its drums, and its sense of both vastness and intimacy, is one of the most recognizable pieces of television music of its era. The Iroh's theme cue, gentle and philosophical and slightly melancholy, carries the character's complexity in under a minute of music. The Aang's theme cue has a playfulness and a lightness that mirrors the character's energy even in moments of danger. These are not generic background textures, they are character descriptions expressed through sound. The most famous piece of music associated with Avatar is a song called Leaves from the Vine. It appears in Book 2, in an episode called The Tales of Ba Sing Se, in a segment focused on Iroh. In that segment, Iroh travels alone to a quiet spot outside the city's walls, carrying offerings, flowers, a portrait, a cup of tea. He sits beneath a tree that has been marked as a memorial, the memorial for his son Lu Ten, who died in battle during Iroh's long siege of Ba Sing Se many years before the events of the show. Iroh sets out his offerings, and then he sings. The melody is gentle and ancient feeling. The lyrics speak of something falling from a vine, drifting on the wind, finding rest. It is a lullaby and a eulogy at the same time. And at the end of the segment, the screen simply reads, "In honor of Mako." Mako Iwamatsu was the voice of Iroh for the first 2 seasons of Avatar. He was a Japanese-American actor of extraordinary range and warmth, an Oscar-nominated performer who had also founded the East-West Players, a theater company dedicated to giving Asian-American actors the roles and the platform they deserved. He had been diagnosed with esophageal cancer. He continued working on Avatar for as long as he was able, and the Tales of Ba Sing Se segment was the last recording he made for the show before his illness made it impossible to continue. He died on the 21st of July 2006. The episode aired 2 months later. The decision to include that dedication card, to say, "In honor of Mako" at the end of a segment in which Iroh sings a song for his dead son, is one of the most quietly devastating artistic choices in the history of American television. Because Iroh's grief for Lu Ten and the show's grief for Mako are the same grief, experienced simultaneously by the character and by everyone who knew what had happened behind the scenes. The show did not announce the connection. It simply placed it there, in the frame, and trusted you to feel it. Greg Baldwin took over the role of Iroh for Book 3. He studied Mako's performance in extensive detail, learning the cadences and the warmth and the particular way that Mako inhabited Iroh's voice. The transition is almost seamless to most ears. Baldwin sounds like the same character. It is one of the most faithful and respectful continuations of a performance in the history of animation. And yet Baldwin has said publicly and clearly that he will never sing Leaves from the Vine. Not in a convention panel, not in a recording session, not anywhere. When asked why, his answer was simple. "It's Mako's song, not mine." That is what respect looks like. Let us talk about how people move. In most animated action sequences, movement is choreographed for spectacle. The goal is to look impressive, to generate excitement, to keep the audience's eyes moving. The underlying logic of the fighting is secondary to its visual impact, and it rarely matters whether the movements depicted correspond to any real martial tradition. Avatar was built on a completely different philosophy. Before a single bending movement was animated, the creators brought in a martial arts consultant named Sifu Kisu of the Harmonious Fist Chinese Athletic Association. Sifu Kisu had deep knowledge of multiple Chinese martial arts traditions, and his role on the show was not to advise from the sidelines but to physically demonstrate every bending movement that appeared in the series. He performed the choreography on camera, and those recordings were given to the animators as frame-by-frame visual reference. The animators were not inventing movements. They were studying a real practitioner performing real forms and translating that physical reality into drawn lines on a cell. Airbending is based on Baguazhang, a Chinese martial art built on circular footwork and evasive, flowing movements. Baguazhang practitioners move in spirals and arcs rather than straight lines. They redirect force rather than meet it head-on. The philosophy of the style is to never be where the attack is, to make yourself as difficult to catch as the wind itself. This is precisely Aang's approach to combat throughout the series. He evades, he redirects, he moves around problems rather than through them. The martial art explains the character, and the character embodies the martial art. Waterbending is based on Tai Chi, which is built on the principle of using an opponent's force against them rather than generating opposing force of your own. Tai Chi practitioners are trained to yield, to redirect, to flow around obstacles the way water flows around stone. Katara's waterbending is full of circular, sweeping motions that gather momentum rather than impose it. When she fights, she is almost never the first to exert force. She waits, reads the incoming attack, and then redirects it. The philosophy of her element is literally expressed in every movement she makes. Earthbending is based on Hung Gar, a southern Chinese martial style known for its wide, deeply rooted stances and its emphasis on powerful, direct strikes. Where waterbending flows, earthbending plants. Where airbending evades, earthbending stands and meets. Earthbenders in the show fight with a solidity that is not stubbornness but confidence. The confidence of someone who knows that the ground beneath them is not going anywhere and that this knowledge is itself a form of power. Firebending is based on Northern Shaolin, characterized by rapid, explosive, highly extended movements. Northern Shaolin is an aggressive style, meant to generate maximum force at maximum speed. When Fire Nation soldiers attack, their movements are sharp and linear. They generate force from within. They do not redirect or yield, they advance. The match between each style and each element's philosophy is not superficial. The creators studied the underlying principles of each martial art and matched them to the underlying principles of each element. Water is about flow and redirection. Earth is about solidity and patience. Fire is about force and aggression. Air is about evasion and freedom. The bending is not just martial arts translated into elemental manipulation. It is martial arts whose philosophies literally embody the elements they represent. And then there is Toph Beifong, introduced in Book 2 as the greatest earthbender in the world who also happens to be 12 years old and blind, does not use hung gar like every other earthbender in the show. Her style is based on southern praying mantis, a completely different martial art. The animators made this change for a specific reason. Hungar's wide-rooted stances require a certain relationship to the ground that works well for sighted fighters, but would have been impractical for Toph's situation and her physical proportions. Southern praying mantis uses lower, more compact movements and emphasizes sensitivity and the ability to detect force through contact, which mirrors Toph's seismic sense precisely. She feels the ground vibrating under her feet, processing the world through touch and vibration the way a sighted person processes it through light. A martial art built on sensitivity was not just aesthetically appropriate for her, it was philosophically correct. If you watch Toph fight and then immediately watch any other earthbender, the difference in their movement vocabulary is visible. She stands differently. She initiates differently. She responds to attack differently. Her fighting is a literally different discipline from everyone around her, expressed through every animated frame in which she raises her hands. There is one more bending innovation worth talking about in this section, because it represents something particularly elegant. In Book 2, Iroh tells Zuko that he invented lightning redirection by studying waterbenders. He explains that lightning, like water, is a form of energy, and that the principles that allow a waterbender to redirect an incoming wave can be applied to redirect an incoming bolt. This is not just a plot point about a character's backstory. It is an animatable truth. When Iroh or Zuko redirects lightning in the show, the movement they use shifts from Northern Shaolin form to Tai Chi form. The animators change the martial arts style mid-technique to visually demonstrate that the character is borrowing from a different element's philosophy. The lightning enters through one hand, flows through the stomach along the path of the body's energy, and exits through the other hand, following the same principles of flow and redirection that waterbending employs. It is a detail that takes less than 2 seconds of screen time and represents hours of choreographic and philosophical research to execute correctly. That is what it looks like when the people making something care about more than the surface. The training sequences across the show are animated with the same discipline. When Aang trains waterbending with Pakku, the movements are slow and circular. When he trains earthbending with Toph, the movements are sharp and stomping and grounded. When he eventually trains firebending and receives the secret knowledge of the original firebenders, the movements are explosive and extended. The animators did not use generic action animation for the training sequences. They created element-specific choreography for each one, maintaining the integrity of the bending system even in scenes that are not fights. A training montage in Avatar is not just a convenient narrative compression device. It is a demonstration of a specific physical and philosophical discipline. And the Kyoshi warriors deserve a mention here, because they represent a beautifully specific choice. Suki and her warriors use a fighting style based on Tessenjutsu, a Japanese martial art that uses iron fans as weapons. The Tessenjutsu tradition used the war fan both as a weapon and as a symbol of status, carried by samurai in feudal Japan. The Kyoshi warriors' fans are modeled on the iron fan of that tradition. The show did not give them a generic combat style and dress it up with props. It found a real martial tradition whose weapon matched the aesthetics of the character and built a complete fighting language around it. The Kyoshi warriors move differently from every other non-bending fighter in the show because their martial art is literally different. This is what it sounds like when you care about movement the way other people care about dialogue. The first season of Avatar, The Last Airbender, aired from February 21st through the 2nd of December 2005. It consists of 20 episodes, and it moves from the ice and blue silence of the Southern Water Tribe through tundra and open ocean, and Earth Kingdom villages and Fire Nation naval corridors to the frozen splendor of the Northern Water Tribe, where the season ends in a siege that was, for American animated television, genuinely unprecedented in its scope and emotional weight. Book 1 is a season about beginnings, which makes sense, but it is also a season about damage, about the difference between what a world was and what it has become after 100 years of war. Every location that Aang and his friends visit in Book 1 carries the mark of the Fire Nation's expansion. The Earth Kingdom towns are frightened and under occupation. The Northern Air Temple, when they find it, has been colonized by refugees who have modified its sacred structures to house their technology. The Southern Water Tribe is a cluster of tents where a thriving civilization used to stand. This damage is never explained through long exposition. It is shown through production design, through the visual contrast between what buildings look like when they are inhabited and confident, and what they look like when they are inhabited by people who are afraid. The show trusts you to do the arithmetic. Aang himself carries the specific weight of someone who does not yet understand what he has lost. He was frozen in ice for 100 years. He went to sleep in a world that had air nomads in it, thousands of them, children and teachers and elders and monks who tended the temples and flew on sky bison and lived the kind of communal, peaceful life that the air nomad culture had built over centuries. And he woke up in a world where all of them were gone, killed in the first military strike of the war, targeted specifically and systematically because the Fire Nation needed to eliminate the Avatar before the next one could be born and learn to oppose them. Aang is a genocide survivor who does not yet know he is a genocide survivor. When he stands in the Southern Air Temple, in the episode simply titled The Southern Air Temple, and finds the skeleton of his teacher, Monk Gyatso, surrounded by the remains of Fire Nation soldiers, the music drops out. There is no dialogue. There is no explanation of what we are looking at. Aang enters the Avatar state not because he has chosen to, but because his grief is large enough to bypass his will, and the accumulated rage of every past Avatar rises through him at once. It is a scene that a children's network had no business being able to produce, and yet it is there, handled with the exact gravity it deserves, landing in the middle of a season that had, up to that point, been warm and funny and adventurous. Book 1's pacing is careful. It introduces the world gradually, letting each new location expand the map a little further, letting each new character fill in a little more of the texture of how people live in this world. The cabbage merchant appears for the first time in this season, a recurring character whose cart of cabbages is destroyed in nearly every city that Team Avatar visits. He is played for comedy, obviously, but he is also doing a specific world-building job. He keeps showing up because ordinary people travel through this world too, following their own concerns, making their own journeys. The Avatar's story is not the only story. The cabbage merchant has a story. It is a worse story, in terms of the frequency with which his livelihood is destroyed, but it is a story. The lunar cycle runs through Book 1 as a quiet, consistent presence. In almost every nighttime scene, the moon is visible somewhere in the background, and its phase is consistent with the timeline of the story. The animators track the lunar cycle across all 20 episodes so that when the show reaches the Siege of the North finale and the full moon appears above the North Pole, amplifying every waterbender in the vicinity and turning the tide of the battle, it is not a convenient plot device. It is the logical conclusion of a lunar cycle that the production team has been faithfully depicting for the entire season. If you go back and track the moon across Book 1, it matches. The Siege of the North is the finale that proved what Avatar was willing to do. It is a two-part episode that includes the death of the moon spirit, an act so catastrophic that every waterbender in the world simultaneously loses their ability to bend, and the merger of Aang with the ocean spirit, which creates a massive water entity that devastates the Fire Nation fleet. The sound designers built a unique audio profile for that merged entity, blending human vocalization with ocean recordings, whale calls, and subsonic rumbles. It does not sound like a person. It does not sound like an animal. It sounds like the ocean itself, wearing a child's body. The opening sequence of the show, the 60-second narration and visual montage that begins every episode, deserves its own careful look. The sequence shows four benders performing elements of their disciplines: a waterbender moving water in flowing arcs, an earthbender raising stone from the ground, a firebender throwing explosive streams of flame, an airbender riding currents of wind. Most viewers assume these are generic demonstrations, anonymous benders illustrating the world's four elements for a newcomer. They are not. Each one is a specific character. The waterbender is Paku, Katara's eventual master at the North Pole. The earthbender is an unnamed student, demonstrating the form taught at the Earth Kingdom's martial arts academy. The firebender is Azula, identifiable by the blue tinge of her flame. And the airbender is not Aang, but a different figure, an ancient air nomad performing a form that predates the events of the show. You can identify these characters by their clothing, their body proportions, and in Azula's case by that unmistakable blue. The opening sequence is not a generic illustration of the world. It is four specific people chosen for specific reasons, doing specific things, and the show never tells you this. The episode called The Storm is worth specific attention as an example of what the show could do structurally when it chose to. The episode intercuts between two flashback sequences, one showing Aang's past and the circumstances of his disappearance, and one showing Zuko's past and the circumstances of his banishment. Both sequences are told in the context of the present narrative, framed by storms, both emotional and meteorological. The parallelism is precise. Both characters, in their respective pasts, were confronted with an impossible situation by an adult authority figure who had made a catastrophic decision, and both characters responded in ways that set the course of the series. Aang ran. Zuko refused to fight. Both choices had consequences that neither of them could have fully predicted. The episode makes these parallel histories legible without ever stating the parallel explicitly, trusting the audience to feel the structural connection the way you feel a chord without being able to name the notes. The color theory of Book 1 is built primarily around blues and whites, the palette of the Water Tribe, the palette of ice and open sky. Even in episodes set in the Earth Kingdom or the Fire Nation, the show maintains a certain coolness in its palette, a sense of winter not quite giving way to spring. This is not accidental. Book 1 is the season of water, and the visual temperature of the show reflects the element it is named for. The world that Aang wakes up into is a cold world. The 100-Year War has drained the color from it in ways that are visible in every landscape the camera shows. The season ended in December 2005, and then, after a gap that felt long to anyone who had already become attached to these characters, production on Book 2 began. Book 2. Earth aired from the 17th of March 2006 through December 1st of the same year. It is 20 episodes, the same count as Book 1, but it feels larger. It is a season about the gap between what you believe and what is true, about the difference between the story a city tells about itself and the reality of what is happening inside its walls, about the way ideology can be maintained only through the systematic destruction of contradicting evidence. The Earth Kingdom is the show's most expansive setting, a continent-sized landmass with deserts and swamps and forests, and the Great Walled City at its center. Aang and his friends spend most of Book 2 moving through it, and almost everywhere they go, they encounter the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from a war that has been going on for 100 years. The people of the Earth Kingdom are not defeated, but they are tired. They have been surviving for so long that surviving has become its own kind of trap. The season introduces Toph in the episode called The Blind Bandit, in a context that is equal parts serious and wonderfully absurd. Earth Rumble 6 is an underground earthbending tournament, and it is structured as an explicit parody of professional wrestling. There is a hyped announcer. There are theatrical entrances with ridiculous ring names. The Boulder, one of the tournament's featured competitors, is a direct parody of Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, complete with the Boulder referring to himself in the third person with the kind of confidence that can only be performed at full commitment or not at all. The character was originally intended to be voiced by Johnson himself, and while that casting did not come together, the parody remains, fully committed, playing the joke completely straight while also being completely aware that it is a joke. Toph's introduction, hidden inside this comedic framework, is the season's first great piece of misdirection. She is introduced as the Blind Bandit, a 12-year-old girl who has been secretly competing in an underground fighting tournament to give her sheltered, overprotected life some kind of edge. Her parents do not know. Her teachers do not know. She is the only person who knows, and she carries the knowledge the way any child carries a secret, with a kind of bright, private pride. She is also the greatest earthbender in the world. This is established immediately and without qualification. She defeats every competitor in Earth Rumble 6, without using her eyes, without changing her expression, without appearing to exert herself significantly. The show does not build to this revelation, it opens with it. Toph is extraordinary from the moment we meet her, and the interesting question is not whether she can fight, but what it costs her to live in a world that underestimates her constantly. Her seismic sense, the ability to feel vibrations through the soles of her feet and translate them into a complete sensory map of her surroundings, is not a compensation for her blindness. It is a different way of perceiving the world that happens to be more useful than sight in some contexts and less useful in others. When Toph cannot feel the ground beneath her, she is genuinely disoriented. When she is on solid earth, she can perceive things that sighted people cannot detect at all. The show treats this not as a superpower in the conventional sense, but as a characteristic of a person who has adapted to her particular way of being in the world. This is why she sleeps with her feet elevated. Throughout every camping scene in which Toph appears, if you watch her when the group settles down for the night, her feet are lifted off the ground. She props them against a rock or a raised mound of earth or a log. This is because if her feet touch the ground while she sleeps, her seismic sense detects every footstep, every movement, every insect within range. Lifting her feet is the equivalent of closing her eyes. It is how she turns off her perception so her mind can rest. The animators included this detail in almost every camping scene across books 2 and 3. The show never mentions it. Nobody explains it. It is simply there, doing its work in silence. Ba Sing Se arrives midway through Book 2, and it arrives as a mystery. The city has a reputation, the city that has never fallen, the city behind walls so massive that they seem less like fortifications and more like geology. When Team Avatar finally enters, they discover something that the show builds slowly and with considerable craft. The city is a lie. Not the city itself, but the official narrative of the city, the story it tells about itself, is a lie. The Dai Li, the city's secret police force, have maintained a system of control through information suppression that is so complete that ordinary citizens of Ba Sing Se genuinely do not know there is a war happening outside the walls. Anyone who mentions the war is taken away, re-educated, and returned with their memories of the conflict carefully removed. The phrase that gets repeated by brainwashed citizens is, "There is no war in Ba Sing Se." The creators researched actual coercive persuasion techniques when writing the show's brainwashing system. The use of repetition, the swinging lantern in a dark room, the steady insistence on a reality that directly contradicts observable evidence, these are documented elements of real coercive persuasion. The show adapted them for animation, but the underlying model is historically grounded. The denial of an observable reality, the insistence that a war that everyone outside the walls knows about does not exist, mirrors propaganda techniques that have been used in authoritarian contexts throughout human history. The show is not being subtle about this comparison. It is being clear, in the way that clear art is clear, without being didactic. The season's emotional peak arrives in the two-part finale, The Crossroads of Destiny, in which Aang and Katara are trapped underground in a crystal cave beneath Ba Sing Se, and Zuko faces the most important decision of his arc to that point. He can choose to help Aang, to side against Azula, to begin the process of becoming the person his uncle Iroh has always believed he could be. Or he can choose the other thing, the familiar thing, the path that leads back to his father's approval. He chooses wrong. This is a remarkable choice for the show to make. Zuko's arc across Book 2 has been pointing toward redemption. The audience, by this point, wants it for him. And the show refuses to give it. Not yet. It lets Zuko make the mistake, lets him make the betrayal, and then it does not soften the consequences. Aang dies. Not permanently, Katara revives him with water from the spirit oasis, but he is dead for a time, and the Avatar state is broken. And Ba Sing Se falls to the Fire Nation, the city that had never fallen, conquered not through military force but through internal betrayal. Book 2 ends in defeat. Not the comfortable TV defeat where the heroes lose one battle before winning the next. A real defeat, with real costs, that the show acknowledges fully and does not excuse. During this season, In the Tales of Ba Sing Se episode, Mako Iwamatsu sang Leaves from the Vine. This was his last recording for the show. He died on the 21st of July 2006. The episode aired on September 29th of that year. The dedication at the end of Iroh's segment, that simple card reading, in honor of Mako, transformed what was already the most emotionally intense 2 minutes in the season into something that lives permanently at the intersection of fiction and real loss. Greg Baldwin took over the role of Iroh for Book 3. He studied Mako's recordings carefully, learned the particular timbre and cadence that Mako had built for the character, and produced a performance so faithful that most viewers did not notice the change. He has declined every request to sing Leaves from the Vine. It's Mako's song, he has said. That is all the explanation that is needed. The swamp episode in Book 2 introduces a concept that the show plants quietly and then allows to grow in significance across the rest of the series. The Foggy Swamp Tribe are waterbenders who have lived for so long in the deep swamp of the Earth Kingdom that their bending has evolved to work with the water inside living plants. They bend the moisture inside vines and roots and organic matter, making them move like limbs. This is technically a form of plant bending, a subset of water bending that the show never names but does not need to name because the concept is legible from what you see. More significantly, the Foggy Swamp Tribe holds a belief that the entire swamp is a single living organism, connected through the root system of the great banyan grove tree at its center. This belief is presented as mystical and specific to their culture. It is also remarkably accurate to real botanical science. Banyan trees in the real world develop extensive aerial root systems that can effectively create single, multi-trunked organisms spanning vast areas. In Utah, the Pando aspen grove is technically a single organism connected by a shared root structure spanning over 100 acres and estimated to be many thousands of years old. The Foggy Swamp Tribe's cosmology is not invented mysticism. It is accurate plant biology dressed in spiritual language. The swamp also provides a moment of foreshadowing so clean and so patient that it rewards careful rewatching. When the group enters the swamp, each member of Team Avatar experiences a hallucination. Aang sees a girl in a white dress whom he does not recognize. She laughs and runs from him. He chases her but cannot catch her. The vision ends without explanation. 3 episodes later, in The Blind Bandit, Aang meets Toph for the first time and recognizes her immediately because of the swamp vision. He had already seen her. The show introduced one of its major characters as a hallucination in a swamp, and then pretended it had not happened, and then 3 episodes later revealed it with the quiet confidence of a story that trusts its own memory. Book 2 also introduces the Dai Li in a way that rewards careful attention to how information is managed. The Dai Li are presented initially as elite Earth Kingdom soldiers, loyal to the Earth King. It takes several episodes to understand that they are actually loyal to a different agenda entirely, that they have been the real power in Ba Sing Se for years, maintaining the city's information blackout not out of loyalty to the crown, but out of loyalty to a system of control that serves their own interests and those of their true master. The reveal of this structure is handled so carefully, with so many small pieces of foreshadowing and background details and in the slight behavioral strangeness of certain characters, that a second viewing makes the whole first half of the Ba Sing Se arc feel different. You see what was there all along. You understand what the Dai Li were doing in scenes where they appeared to be doing nothing in particular. This is a quality of story construction that is rare in any format, let alone in a children's animated show produced on a network television schedule. The ability to seed a revelation across multiple episodes, to make it feel inevitable in retrospect while keeping it genuinely surprising in the moment, requires a discipline and a long view that most television productions never manage. Avatar managed it consistently, across all 3 seasons, because the writers had the full map from the beginning and were building toward it with every episode they wrote. Book 3. Fire began airing on the 21st of September 2007. It runs 21 episodes, one more than either of the previous seasons, and it culminates in a 4-part finale that aired as a single 2-hour television event on the 19th of July, 2008. Sozin's Comet, as the finale is known, is at approximately 92 minutes, one of the longest animated series finales ever produced for American television at the time of its airing. The season picks up in the immediate aftermath of Book 2's devastating conclusion. Ba Sing Se has fallen. The Fire Nation believes Aang is dead. The world believes the Avatar is dead. And Team Avatar is at their lowest point, scattered, grieving, uncertain how to move forward. They are also, for the first time, inside the Fire Nation, hidden among the population they have been opposing. The most visually striking element of Book 3's early episodes is Aang's hair. For most of the series, he is bald, his head shaved in the tradition of air nomad monks. This baldness is not just a costume choice. It is the most immediately readable marker of his identity. When Aang walks through the world with his tattooed, shaved head, there is no ambiguity about who he is or what he represents. He is the Avatar. He is the air nomad. He is the boy who carries the weight of the world. And the bending tattoos on his head, the blue arrows that trace the chi pathways through his body, connecting to the crown chakra at the top of his skull, announce his nature before he speaks a word. In Book 3, his hair grows out. For the first time, Aang looks like a normal Fire Nation kid. The arrows are hidden. The robes are Fire Nation red and gray. And the visual transformation raises a question that the season is deeply interested in. Who is Aang when the markers of his identity are concealed? When the symbols are gone, what is left? The answer the show gives, steadily and across multiple episodes, is that Aang is still Aang. His values do not require the costume. His pacifism, his compassion, his vegetarianism, his tendency to solve problems with gentleness before force, all of it persists even when he looks like somebody else. The symbols were never the person. They were expressions of the person, and the person remains. The Day of Black Sun, the two-part invasion episode that arrives midway through the season, represents one of the most elaborate action sequences in the show's run. The invasion force that storms the Fire Nation during the solar eclipse is depicted with enough tactical specificity to be comprehensible as a military operation. The submarines are water-powered, propelled by waterbenders rather than engines. There are no engines to see because none are needed. The armor worn by the invasion force is thick and covers the body completely, appropriate for a force that knows they will face firebending attacks. These details are not explained through dialogue. They are visible in the design, communicated to any viewer who is paying attention. And then Zuko walks into his father's throne room and tells Fire Lord Ozai that he is leaving. This scene, Zuko's confrontation with Ozai during the eclipse, is one of the quietest and most important scenes in the season. Zuko does not attack his father. He does not threaten him. He simply says what he knows and what he is choosing, and then he walks out. The music drops away during this scene, and what is left is just the two men's voices in a stone room, and the sound of everything Zuko has spent 3 seasons working toward finally being said out loud. The beach episode, The Beach, deserves attention as an example of what the show could do with its antagonists when given the space to make them human. Azula, Mai, and Ty Lee spend an episode on vacation at Ember Island, a Fire Nation resort town, and the episode uses the unstructured time of leisure to reveal the internal architecture of each character in ways that the show has not previously made explicit. Azula, who has been constructed throughout Books 2 and 3 as a near-perfect villain, a prodigy of cruelty and control, reveals in The Beach that she does not know how to be a person who is not performing. She does not know how to talk to people outside of manipulation. She does not know how to read a social situation that is not a tactical one. She is brilliant, and she is almost entirely alone inside that brilliance, and the episode lets you see this without softening it or excusing it. Mai, who has been characterized primarily as cold and disaffected, reveals that her detachment is not indifference, but is a learned self-protection against the consequences of caring too visibly in a family that did not reward emotion. Ty Lee reveals a deep anxiety about individual identity, a fear of losing herself among the expectations others have of her. These are real, recognizable psychological states given to characters who might have remained simple antagonists in a lesser show. The episode ends with all 3 of them at a bonfire, and the fire they are sitting around is the wrong element for them somehow. Azula has built it too large and too hot, the way she does everything, with maximum force and minimum regard for the people nearby. It is a small detail, but it is characteristic. The puppet master introduces bloodbending through a horror film structure, with a dark color palette, slowed pacing, and dissonant strings that signal to the audience before any content warning can appear that something different is happening in this episode. The entire hour is structured like a ghost story, from the campfire tales at the opening to the investigation in the Dark Village to the revelation of what Hama has become in her years of imprisonment. Bloodbending is the furthest extension of waterbending's core principle, that water can be found and manipulated anywhere, including inside the human body. The show introduced the idea that water exists inside organic matter through the swamp benders in Book 2. The jump from plant bending to blood bending is a short one in conceptual terms, but the emotional distance between them is vast, and the show handles the distance with appropriate gravity. The Avatar and the Fire Lord reveals the ancient friendship between Avatar Roku and Fire Lord Sozin, framing Aang and Zuko's current dynamic as a second chance at something that went catastrophically wrong the first time. The episode is structured so that scenes of young Roku and young Sozin mirror scenes of young Aang and young Zuko from earlier in the series. The parallel is made visual through staging. The same shot compositions, the same camera angles, the same emotional temperatures placed in service of different people in different times. The show is saying directly that the Avatar and the Fire Nation Prince have a history that predates Aang's birth, that the patterns of this relationship have played out before, and that how this version ends depends entirely on whether the people living it can learn from what their predecessors could not. And then there is the finale. The Agni Kai between Zuko and Azula in the final episode is animated with a deliberateness that makes it unlike any other fight in the series. The camera pulls back into wide shots. The music shifts from action scoring to something closer to a requiem. The fight is staged in a massive, empty arena, the two siblings moving through a space that feels enormous and abandoned, and the visual effect is of two people destroying each other in a place where no one is watching. Azula's fire flickers between blue and orange as she loses control of herself, the color instability mirroring her psychological fragmentation. Zuko's fire remains steady and orange throughout, not because he is stronger but because he is present in himself in a way that Azula, for all her power, has never been allowed to be. The creators have said that they wanted the final Agni Kai to feel not like a victory but like a funeral. It is the quietest and most deliberately paced fight in the entire series, and it carries more weight than battles 3 times its length because it is about grief rather than triumph. The finale gives every main character a resolution that corresponds to their arc. Aang resolves his crisis of identity by finding a way to defeat Ozai without killing him, a solution that the show earns by establishing across 3 seasons that Aang's pacifism is not naivety, but principle, and that a principle under sufficient pressure does not become a weakness. Zuko resolves his crisis of honor by fighting for what is right rather than for his father's approval. Katara resolves her arc by defeating Azula through strategy and precision rather than raw power. Sokka resolves his journey from comedian to leader by coordinating the destruction of the Fire Nation's airship fleet. Toph resolves her independence by inventing a new bending technique in the moment she needs it, saving her friends using a capability that no earthbender before her has ever developed. Iroh resolves his long arc from conqueror to liberator by retaking Ba Sing Se with the Order of the White Lotus, a group of wise elders from all 4 nations who have maintained their friendships and their principles across decades of war. None of these resolutions feel rushed. None of them feel imposed. They feel earned, because they have been built toward across 61 episodes, and because the people who built them never lost sight of the map. The final image of Avatar, The Last Airbender, is Aang and Katara kissing on the balcony of the Jasmine Dragon, Iroh's tea shop in Ba Sing Se, the sun setting behind them. The camera pulls back slowly, widening to show the balcony, the city, the sky. For 61 episodes, the camera has been close to these characters. It has been with them in caves and deserts and temples and prisons. And in the last moments of the last episode, it lets go. It gives you distance. It says, "This is where I leave them. They will be fine." The sunset is warm oranges and deep purples, not an exclamation mark, not a question mark, a period, complete. A world can be built beautifully and still feel hollow if the people in it are not real. Avatar understood this. The cultural research and the martial arts accuracy and the calligraphy and the music all exist within a framework of character work that is, for any medium, exceptional. For an animated children's show produced for a network whose content standards were famously cautious, it is nothing short of remarkable. Let us start with Aang. Aang is 12 years old. He is also, depending on how you count, 112 years old. He is the last surviving air nomad. He is the Avatar, carrier of every past Avatar's memories and power. He is a child. He is a monk. He is a refugee. He is a soldier who refuses to kill. He is a boy who ran away from his responsibilities and ended up encased in ice for a century because of it. and who has to live with the specific weight of knowing that if he had stayed, if he had not run, he might have been able to stop the war before it started, or at least to face what was coming rather than sleeping through it. Aang displays what, in clinical terms, would be recognized as symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress. He has nightmares. He avoids discussing the genocide of his people. He has emotional flashbacks triggered by specific stimuli, including the sight of the Southern Air Temple and encounters with Fire Nation military. He oscillates between periods of relative stability and moments of overwhelming grief that the Avatar state sometimes triggers involuntarily. The show never uses clinical language to describe this. It simply depicts, with accuracy and consistency, what it looks like when a child carries a weight that no child should have to carry. And it is consistent across all 3 seasons. The trauma does not resolve neatly. It does not disappear after a single cathartic scene. It is there, in the background of almost everything Aang does, shaping his choices and his fears and his moments of unexpected joy. Katara is, among other things, one of the most quietly complex characters in the show. Her waterbending journey is visible in the animation across all 3 seasons in a way that most shows would not bother to depict. In the early episodes of Book 1, her bending is clumsy and limited. She can move small amounts of water with effort and imprecision. By midway through Book 1, after training with the waterbending scroll she steals from the pirates, her movements have become more fluid. After training with Pakku at the North Pole, she is beginning to move like a master. By Book 3, she fights with a power and control that makes her one of the most formidable benders in the series. This progression is visible in the animation, frame by frame, episode by episode. The animators tracked her skill development fight by fight, making her improvement visual rather than verbal. Nobody announces that Katara has gotten better. You simply see it, in the efficiency of her movements, in the volume of water she can control, in the way she reads a fight and responds to it. Katara also carries a specific grief throughout the show, the loss of her mother, killed in a Fire Nation raid when Katara was young. This grief shapes everything she does, including her protectiveness of Aang, her determination to become a master bender, and her complicated relationship with the idea of forgiveness. When she finally confronts the man responsible for her mother's death in the episode, The Southern Raiders, she makes a choice that the show does not judge. She does not kill him. She does not forgive him. She simply looks at him and leaves. The show allows this to be enough. It does not resolve Katara's grief into a lesson. It simply depicts what a person who has lived a long time with something unresolvable looks like when they finally come face to face with its source. Sokka is the show's greatest stealth achievement in characterization. He is the comedian, the non-bender, the one whose role seems to be to ask the questions that allow the more magical characters to explain things. But underneath the jokes, Sokka is a tactical genius who plans the Day of Black Sun invasion with the precision of a trained military strategist and who coordinates the destruction of the Fire Nation's airship fleet in the finale with a command instinct that has been building all along, visible in retrospect if not always in the moment. Sokka's arc is the most difficult to summarize because it is about something that resists summarization. It is about finding your value in a world that measures worth primarily through a power you do not possess. Almost everyone around Sokka can bend. The Avatar can bend all 4 elements. His sister can waterbend. Toph can earthbend. Zuko and Aang can firebend. Sokka cannot bend anything, and the show never resolves this absence by giving him a hidden power or a magical discovery that compensates. What the show gives him instead is 100 small moments, across 3 seasons, of demonstrating that strategy and creativity and humor and love are forms of power too. His boomerang always comes back. His plans usually work. His jokes land. And when the boomerang does not come back in the finale, lost in the chaos of the airship battle, the show does not address the loss because the loss speaks for itself. For 61 episodes, everything Sokka threw came back. The one time it does not is the most dangerous moment of his life, and the loss in that context is not a symbol of failure but a mark of how much he risked. Zuko is the character that Avatar is most famous for, and for good reason. His is one of the most carefully constructed redemption arcs in the history of serialized storytelling. The key to its success is that it is not linear. It is not a steady progress from bad to good. It is more like a graph with frequent dips and reversals, each one acknowledging that real change is not a smooth incline but a series of advances and setbacks, and that the advances do not erase the setbacks but accumulate alongside them. Zuko begins the series as a villain. He is the Fire Nation prince, banished from his home by his father Fire Lord Ozai as punishment for a perceived act of disrespect, and told that he can only return once he has captured the Avatar. His initial motivation is not ideology. It is not belief in the Fire Nation's righteousness. It is the desire to be loved by his father, and the belief that capturing the Avatar is the key to that love. This motivation is deeply human, and it makes him sympathetic even when he is doing terrible things. You understand why he is doing what he is doing, even as you cannot support it. Across Book 1, Zuko is relentless in his pursuit. He is also occasionally compassionate, in moments that the show does not announce as significant but which accumulate across the season. He spares the lives of people he could have killed. He helps strangers in moments when helping them costs him nothing but delays him. He is not purely the character his father made him. He is also the character his mother raised, and his mother, as the show gradually reveals, was a person of considerable moral courage. Book 2 is where Zuko's arc becomes truly complex. He is no longer in the Fire Nation. He is no longer pursuing the Avatar with his uncle. He is a refugee in the Earth Kingdom, working in a tea shop with Iroh, and for a significant stretch of the season, he is closer to being a good person than he has ever been or will be again for quite some time. And then the finale comes and he makes the choice to side with Azula, and everything that has been building collapses. Book 3 is where the long work of redemption finally happens. Zuko returns to the Fire Nation, is welcomed back, is given everything he thought he wanted, and he finds that it does not feel like what he wanted. He cannot live with the choice he made in the cave beneath Ba Sing Se. He cannot make peace with what he knows about what the Fire Nation has done and is doing. And so, across a sequence of episodes that handle his gradual realization with extraordinary care, he arrives at the moment when he goes to join Team Avatar. And then he has to earn their trust. This is crucial. The show does not let Zuko's decision to do the right thing be rewarded immediately with acceptance. Katara, whose mother was killed by the Fire Nation, wants nothing to do with him. Aang is willing to try, but the others are not. Toph warms to him fastest, because Toph has always seen through performance to reality, and she can feel that he means it. But Katara's acceptance comes last, and it comes only after the Southern Raiders episode, after she has gone through the unresolvable thing and found that she cannot resolve it, and that Zuko's presence in her world is something she has to reckon with separately from her grief. The word honor appears in Zuko's dialogue with extraordinary frequency in Book 1. He says it like a prayer, a constant petition to a force that feels external to him, something he has to capture and return rather than something he can build from within. By Book 2, the word appears less often, as Zuko begins to question whether honor is given by fathers or made by choices. By Book 3, he rarely says it at all. He has stopped chasing it because he has found it. Not in his father's approval, not in the Fire Nation's victory, but in doing what is right when doing what is right costs something real. The word disappears from his vocabulary because it has become so integrated into who he is that he no longer needs to name it. Azula is in some respects the most tragic character in the series, more tragic even than Zuko, because she does not get a redemption. The show treats her as someone who was never given the conditions that redemption requires. Where Zuko had Iroh, who loved him unconditionally and waited patiently for him to find himself, Azula had Ozai, who used her as an instrument and rewarded her only in proportion to her usefulness. She internalized that transaction so completely that she cannot imagine a different kind of relationship. She does not have friends. She has subordinates and threats. Mai and Ty Lee stay close to her not because they love her, but because they are afraid of her. And Azula knows this and accepts it because she does not know what love from peers would even look like. Her fire is blue. This is established from her first appearance and maintained throughout the series. Blue fire burns at a higher temperature than orange fire. The color communicates immediately and without dialogue that Azula's firebending is more refined, more intense, more dangerous than anyone else's. It is the visual language of extreme capability, and it is also, in retrospect, a visual language of isolation. She burns hotter and nobody can stand close to her. In the finale, when Azula begins to unravel, her fire flickers between blue and orange, the color instability mirroring the psychological instability. The thing that made her most powerful is the first thing to go when she loses control of herself. The show never explains this. The image explains itself. Her breakdown in the finale is the show treating a character who has done genuinely terrible things with more psychological honesty than she deserves by any simple moral accounting. The show does not redeem her. It does not excuse her, but it makes clear that what she is at least partly a product of what she was given, and that the same system that produced Zuko's struggle for identity produced Azula's particular kind of damage. Two children raised in the same house by the same father, and what they became tells you everything about the difference between conditional and unconditional love. Toph, Iroh, Azula, Ty Lee, Mai, Jet, Suki, Zuko's mother Ursa, each of them has this same quality of depth, this same sense that the show has thought about who they are beyond the scenes in which they appear. Iroh's obsession with tea is not a quirk. It is a philosophy. Tea is what Iroh does when he is not fighting, which is almost always, and it creates pockets of calm throughout the story, moments in which the pace slows and the audience breathes with the character. His tea shop is not just a hiding place, it is a statement. I will maintain the practice of civilization even in the middle of a war. I will offer you a warm drink even if you were my enemy yesterday. This is what it means to believe in something. In May 2020, Netflix added Avatar: The Last Airbender to its streaming library. The show had ended 12 years before. Its audience, those children who had been 6, 7, 8, 10, 11 in 2005 and 2008, were now in their late teens and 20s. They found the show on a platform that was already in their lives, in a moment when much of the world had gone still and people were sitting in their homes with more time to watch television than they had ever had before. Within days, Avatar was the #1 show on Netflix in the United States. Not in its category, not among animated shows. #1, full stop. More people were watching it than any other show on the largest streaming platform in the world. The numbers were staggering. The entire Avatar franchise, including the original series, The Legend of Korra, and every animated property associated with the world, accumulated approximately 900 million hours of viewing on Netflix in the first half of 2024 alone. That figure encompasses the live-action adaptation that premiered in February 2024, which drew 21.2 million views in its first 4 days and became Netflix's most-watched new series of that opening weekend, surpassing the record previously held by the live-action adaptation of One Piece. But the 2020 moment is the one worth dwelling on, because what happened in 2020 was not a marketing campaign or a promotional push. Nickelodeon did not spend significant resources pushing Avatar onto Netflix's front page. The show simply appeared, and the audience found it, and the audience told other people about it, and those people watched it too. The growth was entirely organic, driven by genuine enthusiasm from people who had grown up with the show and people who were encountering it for the first time. Adults who had watched it as children in 2005 returned to it as adults in 2020 and found things they had missed. The political commentary was clearer to them now. The grief was more familiar. The complicated characters were more legible. The show had not changed. They had, and the show had enough inside it to meet them where they were, at whatever age they arrived. Meanwhile, a new generation was discovering it for the first time. Children who had not been born in 2005 were watching Avatar in 2020 and finding in it the same things that the 2005 audience had found. The adventure, the humor, the emotional depth, the feeling of a world that was real and worth caring about. This double renewal, old fans returning and new fans arriving simultaneously, was a demonstration of something the show's creators had understood from the beginning. A story that is made with genuine care does not have a shelf life. It does not expire when its target demographic ages out. It simply waits, patiently, doing its quiet work in the world, accumulating new meaning with every passing year. The resurgence convinced the studio executives at Nickelodeon and its parent company Viacom CBS that the Avatar franchise was still viable, still alive, still capable of generating the kind of cultural energy that studios spend enormous resources trying to manufacture. In February 2021, Viacom CBS announced the formation of Avatar Studios, a dedicated production entity whose sole purpose was to create new content within the world of Avatar, The Last Airbender, and The Legend of Korra. Brian Konietzko and Michael DiMartino were named co-chief creative officers of Avatar Studios. They would lead the new entity. They would make the decisions. The franchise that had started with a sketch in a drawer in 2001 now had its own studio, dedicated entirely to it, with the original creators at the helm. The first project announced by Avatar Studios was an animated theatrical film, later titled Avatar Aang, The Last Airbender, directed by Lauren Montgomery, and featuring an extraordinary voice cast that includes Eric Nam as Aang, Steven Yeun, Dave Bautista, Taika Waititi, Freda Pinto, and Ke Huy Quan, among others. The film was produced at Flying Bark Productions and Studio Mir, the same Seoul-based animation studio whose founders had previously worked on the original series at JM Animation. The lineage is direct. The people who animated the original show trained the people who would animate what comes next. The Legend of Korra, the sequel series that ran for 4 seasons from 2012 through 2014, had demonstrated that the Avatar world had room for more than one protagonist, more than one era, more than one set of questions. Set 70 years after the events of the original series, Korra followed a 17-year-old water tribe girl who was brash and confident and physical and spiritually uncertain in ways that Aang had never quite been. The show broke new ground in its depiction of industrialization and urbanization within the Avatar world, and it concluded with a romantic relationship between its 2 female leads that was, for American animation in 2014, genuinely unprecedented. The live-action Netflix adaptation, which premiered in February 2024 with a reported budget of approximately $120 million for its first season, brought its own interpretations of the characters and its own approach to the material. Its showrunner, Albert Kim, had watched the original series with his daughter and understood, as he has said publicly, how rare it was to find an epic fantasy world drawing its influences from Asian and indigenous cultures. The live-action production brought in consultants from Japanese folk music traditions, indigenous parka designers for the water tribe costumes, and a stunt coordinator who worked with the same philosophy of martial art as language that the original series had pioneered. Avatar Studios has confirmed that multiple projects are in various stages of development simultaneously. At least 2 additional animated feature films are in development beyond the first one. A sequel series to The Legend of Korra, which will introduce a new Avatar of Earth Kingdom origin, was reportedly in production as of mid-2024. Konietzko has hinted at projects that will explore the divide between the northern and southern water tribes, and DiMartino has spoken about the vast amount of Avatar history that remains untouched. They joked in an interview that they could be working on Avatar for the next 20 years based solely on the ideas they currently have in development. This does not feel like a stretch. The world they built is large enough to sustain it. The Avatar franchise also has an extensive presence in comics and graphic novels. The graphic novel series has spent over 70 cumulative weeks on the New York Times graphic novel bestseller list, hitting the top position multiple times. These stories, set in the immediate aftermath of the original series and following the characters into young adulthood, are considered canonical and have been overseen by DiMartino and other writers closely connected to the original production. They expand the world without contradicting it, filling in gaps and exploring implications that the original 61 episodes did not have room for. Jeremy Zuckerman, who composed the original score, has continued to evolve his relationship with the franchise's music. The score for the Sozon's Comet finale, the only portion of the original series recorded with a live orchestra, became the foundation for an orchestral concert tour that premiered in 2024, featuring the music of Avatar. The Last Airbender performed live by a full symphony orchestra in venues around the world. Zuckerman has described the process of expanding these scores for live performance as a 20-year journey, the culmination of everything he learned about sound and emotion and the specific way that music can carry a story when words run out. The show's influence on American animation broadly is difficult to overstate. Before Avatar, American animated series were predominantly episodic in structure, with most shows assuming that any given episode might be the first one a viewer encounters and building accordingly. Very few American animated shows prior to Avatar attempted season-long narrative arcs with genuine consequences, let alone a 3-season story with a predetermined ending and dozens of plot threads that were seeded episodes before their payoff. After Avatar, serialized animated storytelling became not just acceptable but aspirational. Shows like Gravity Falls, Steven Universe, and The Owl House cite Avatar directly as a model for how American animation could handle continuous narrative. The show did not just tell a great story. It expanded the definition of what American animation was allowed to be. The Avatar, The Last Airbender graphic novel series extended the story into the period immediately following the finale, with the blessing and active involvement of the original creative team. These comics have spent over 70 cumulative weeks on the New York Times graphic novel bestseller list, including time at the #1 position. They depict the beginning of Republic City, the reconciliation of the Fire Nation's role in the world, the struggles of rebuilding a world that has been at war for a century, and the personal journeys of the characters into young adulthood. They are canonical. They honor the rules of the world and the established characters with the same care the original show applied to its own material. The franchise endures because the original series was built to endure. Not by accident, not by luck, by intention. There is something that happens when you get very close to a piece of art that was made with extraordinary care. You stop being able to see it clearly. You are inside it, surrounded by it, breathing it. The details that made the whole are too close to be legible as a whole. What you need, sometimes, is distance. The kind of distance that comes with years. The kind that comes with watching something as a child and then returning to it as an adult with different eyes, different knowledge, different wounds, and finding that the thing you loved has not diminished but has grown more of itself in the time you were away. This is what happens with Avatar, The Last Airbender. And it is not an accident. The show was designed to grow with its audience, not in the way that phrase is often used, as a marketing description for content that is technically accessible to multiple demographics. Designed in the sense that the creators made specific choices about what to include and what to withhold, what to show directly and what to imply, what to name and what to leave unnamed, in ways that created different layers of meaning accessible at different stages of development. A 6-year-old watching Avatar in 2005 saw an adventure story about a funny, brave kid and his flying bison who needed to learn to fight and save the world. That story is completely real, completely honest, completely there in every episode. The 6-year-old was not wrong about what they were watching. They were just watching the surface of something that also had depth. The 16-year-old who returned to the show saw the philosophy, saw Zuko's identity crisis, saw the political commentary embedded in Ba Sing Se, saw the grief that runs underneath almost every character's humor, saw the way the show treats adults not as reliable guides but as fallible humans who sometimes pass their damage on to the children around them. The 26-year-old saw the craft, the martial arts research, the cultural specificity, the musical palette, the way the animation changes when Aang enters the spirit world, the way color is used to track Zuko's psychological state from episode to episode. The 36-year-old sees all of it at once, and underneath it, something that has no name, the feeling of a world that was loved into existence by the people who built it. This is the rarest thing in art. Not competence, which is achievable through discipline, not cleverness, which is achievable through intelligence, but love, the specific quality of attention that comes from people who cared about every detail because they could not imagine caring about less. The calligraphy nobody can read makes the world feel older. The martial art nobody named makes the fighting feel real. The lunar cycle nobody tracked makes the siege feel inevitable. None of these details, taken individually, would change the experience of watching the show in any measurable way. But accumulated over 61 episodes, absorbed through thousands of individual frames and musical cues and spoken lines and visual choices, they create something that no single detail could create on its own. They create the feeling of a world, the conviction that what you are watching is not a drawing but a place. And that feeling, that sense of being somewhere rather than watching somewhere, is not an accident, and it is not a byproduct. It is the product. It is the thing the show was designed to make you feel. Every hidden detail is a brick in the foundation of that feeling. And the foundation is so deep and so carefully laid that you do not see the bricks, you just see the world. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. She meant that genuinely looking at something, giving it the full weight of your awareness, is an act of love. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that says, what I am seeing is worth my time and my care. That is what Brian Konietzko and Michael DiMartino and Jeremy Zuckerman and Sifu Kisu and the calligraphers and the storyboard artists and the Korean animation studios and the voice cast did. They paid attention to the world they were building, to the cultures they were drawing from, to the audience they were making something for. And because they paid attention, the world they built pays attention back. It rewards every viewing. It reveals something new each time. It finds the viewer at whatever age they arrive, with whatever they are carrying, and it has something to offer that meets them there. This is what the evolution of Avatar is really about. Not just the production history, not just the cultural research, not just the awards and the streaming numbers and the studio that now bears the name of the franchise. It is about a process of creation that began with a sketch in a drawer in Burbank, California, in the spring of 2001, and that has never really stopped. The world of Avatar is still being built. New projects are in development, new stories are being shaped, new animators are learning the visual language that was first articulated in those early storyboards, new musicians are adding their instruments to a palette that began with Chinese strings and Tibetan bowls, new writers are finding meaning in the same elemental system that Brian and Mike argued into existence in late-night conversations over 2 decades ago. The visual design of the show also carried something that is easier to feel than to describe, which is a commitment to beauty for its own sake. The landscapes in Avatar are gorgeous, not in a generic animated way, not with the competent generic backgrounds that fill most television animation, but with the specific, gorgeous quality of places that someone has studied and loves. The desert sequences in Book 2 have the particular quality of light that exists in real deserts at high noon, that white overexposed quality where the sky loses its blue and the ground loses its shadow, and everything becomes flat and overwhelmingly present. The Northern Water Tribe sequences have the specific blue-white luminosity of ice lit from within. The Fire Nation Islands have the dark volcanic beauty of real Pacific Island formations, lush green against black stone, tropical and severe at the same time. The background artists on Avatar did work that rarely gets acknowledged because background art is not the kind of thing that gets reviewed or celebrated, but it is the layer of production that determines whether a world feels like a real place or feels like a stage set. The difference between competent background art and exceptional background art is the difference between a world that you watch and a world that you feel like you are inside. Avatar's backgrounds put you inside the world. They have the weight and the texture and the atmospheric specificity of real places, filtered through artistic sensibility into something that is heightened but not dishonest. The show also uses silence as a storytelling tool with more deliberate intent than almost any other animated series. Key emotional moments are scored with minimal or no music. When Aang finds the skeleton of Monk Gyatso, the music drops out. When Zuko redirects lightning at Ozai in the Day of Black Sun and then walks out, the music drops out. When Katara confronts the man who killed her mother and chooses not to act, the music drops out. The show understood something about the relationship between sound and emotion that most television content does not apply consistently, which is that the absence of music can carry more weight than any score. Silence creates a kind of pressure in the viewer. It signals that what is happening in the scene is too large for music to contain, too real for aesthetic processing. In those moments, the show strips away everything except what is happening in the frame, and trusts you to be present with it. The production team made these silence decisions in the animatic stage, building them into the rhythm of the episode before the composer ever received the scenes. This means the silences were not an editorial afterthought or a budgetary decision. They were creative choices made at the structural level of the story, as fundamental as any line of dialogue. These are the kinds of decisions that do not make it into a promotional description of a show. They are the kinds of decisions that accumulate invisibly across 61 episodes that you feel in your body without knowing you are feeling them, that contribute to the overall sense that what you are watching is being crafted rather than produced. And somewhere, right now, a child is watching Avatar for the first time. They are watching Aang fall out of an iceberg and gasp at the cold air. They are watching Katara hold her hands over water and make it move. Barely. Almost not at all. The first impossible act of a long journey. They are watching Zuko stand on the bow of a Fire Nation ship with his jaw set and his eyes searching, looking for something he cannot quite name. They are watching Sokka crack a joke at precisely the wrong moment and somehow make the scene better for it. They are watching Toph stand in a fighting ring with her arms at her sides, her bare feet reading the stone beneath her, absolutely unafraid. And beneath all of it, invisibly and completely, the show is paying attention to them. The calligraphy they cannot read is making the world feel older. The martial art they cannot identify is making the fighting feel real. The lunar cycle they are not tracking is making the siege feel inevitable. The music built from instruments they may never have heard before is giving each nation a sound that they will remember for the rest of their lives, associated with a place that does not physically exist but that they have visited more completely than many places that do. This is the gift. Not the adventure, though the adventure is real. Not the humor, though the humor is genuine. Not even the emotional depth, though the emotional depth is considerable. The gift is the world. The feeling of a world that was made with care so thorough that it seeps into you without your knowing it. The way water seeps into stone. The way music enters a room before you realize you are listening. Brian Konietzko had a sketch in a drawer. Michael DiMartino was watching a documentary. A conversation happened. And from that conversation, through years of research and collaboration and craft and revision and care, a world was built that millions of people have lived in, across 2 decades and counting, finding something new in it every time they return. The world of Avatar, the Last Airbender, is still there. The air temples are still on their cliffsides. The swamp benders are still listening to the roots. Iroh is still somewhere making tea, the steam rising in a slow spiral, the water exactly the right temperature. Appa is still flying. The moon is still full over the North Pole. The calligraphy is still real, every character brushed by a careful hand, in every background, in every frame, whether or not anyone is looking. Whether or not anyone is looking, someone always cared about that, and that caring is what holds the world together even when the screen goes dark. And they do not know yet about the calligraphy. They do not know about Sifu Kisu, or the lunar cycle, or the reason Toph elevates her feet. They do not know about Mako, or about Greg Baldwin's refusal to sing one particular song. They do not know about the sketch in the drawer, or the documentary about the South Pole explorers, or the late-night drive across Burbank to share an idea that had finally clicked. They will learn these things, if they look, if they come back, if they let the show grow with them, the way the show was always intended to, at 6 and 16 and 26 and 36, each time finding something the previous self had not been ready to see. Consider what it means for a child watching Avatar in 2005 to encounter, for the first time, the concept of chi blocking based on real acupressure. To hear a Tibetan singing bowl underscoring a moment of spiritual awakening. To see a city whose class stratification is built into the architecture of its concentric rings. To watch a character's grief be treated as something that cannot be resolved in a single episode, that has to be carried forward, that leaves marks that stay. The child does not know these references are real. The child absorbs them as part of the story, as part of the world. And years later, when that child encounters the real thing, a real Tai Chi class, a real Chinese temple, a real bamboo flute played in a monastery courtyard, they recognize it. Not because they studied it, because they played in it. Because a cartoon gave them the shape of the thing before they knew what it was called. This is what Avatar does better than almost any show in the history of animation. It does not just entertain. It seeds knowledge. It plants references to real cultures, real philosophies, real martial arts, real spiritual traditions in the minds of children who will spend the next decade and more growing into those references. The show is a time capsule of curiosity, and every hidden detail is the mechanism by which that curiosity is delivered. The Ember Island Players episode in Book 3, which airs near the end of the final season, is the show's most self-aware moment, and possibly its most generous one. In the episode, Team Avatar watches a theatrical production that dramatizes their own adventures. The play gets nearly everything wrong. Characters are miscast. Emotional beats are misread. The tone is either overwrought or inappropriately comedic. But the episode is not simply a comedic recap. It is the show's commentary on how stories get distorted when they pass through the wrong hands, and it is also a direct acknowledgement of the show's own fandom. The actress playing Katara is relentlessly emotional, in a way that parodies fan complaints about Katara being too earnest. The actor playing Toph is a large adult man, referencing a detail from the show's own development where Toph was originally conceived as a male character before the creators changed her to female. The character watching the play who whispers, "Did Jet just die?" and gets the response, "It was really unclear," as the show speaking directly to its most famous piece of genuine narrative ambiguity, acknowledging that Jet's death was deliberately ambiguous, making a joke about it, and in doing so telling you that the creators were always paying attention to what the audience was paying attention to. The show was always smarter than you were, not condescendingly, generously. It knew you would come back. It knew you would be older. It had enough inside it to meet you at every age. And this is why it will never fade. Not because of the streaming numbers or the studio or the merchandise or the sequels. Because of the attention. The attention that was paid to every frame of it, to every carefully brushed Chinese character on a background scroll, to every Tai Chi form in a waterbending sequence, to every note of music built from an Indonesian gamelan and an Armenian duduk and a Tibetan singing bowl. Because the people who made it paid attention with the full weight of what they had, and what they built in return is a world that carries that weight back, quietly, in every frame, in every silence between notes, in every morning that you wake up and find that you are still thinking about it. Take a slow breath. Let this settle wherever you need it to settle. The world of Avatar is still out there, still waiting, still hiding things in its margins, still rewarding attention with discovery, the same way it always has, the same way it always will. Think about what it means that the calligraphy is real, not just as a production fact, but as a statement of values. The creators of Avatar did not make it real because anybody asked them to. They did not make it real because it would help the show's ratings or because the network required it. They made it real because they were building a world, and a world needs to be real all the way through, not just in the parts that people look at directly. The parts that nobody notices matter just as much as the parts that everybody sees. Maybe more, because the parts that nobody notices are the parts that do their work in silence, quietly building the foundation that the visible world stands on. This is a way of thinking about craft that you can apply to anything you make, not just animation, not just storytelling, anything. Any work that you do carefully and completely and without waiting for someone to notice, the invisible work accumulates. It builds into something that people can feel even when they cannot identify it. They feel it as quality, as authenticity, as the sense that the thing in front of them was made by someone who cared. And perhaps that is the last and most enduring thing that Avatar, The Last Airbender, has to offer the people who have grown up loving it. Not just the story, though the story is extraordinary. Not just the world, though the world is fully realized in ways that most worlds are not, but the example. The evidence that it is possible to make something that is more careful than it needs to be, more detailed than it needs to be, more honest than it needs to be, and that in doing so you create something that lasts, something that grows, something that keeps finding new people and giving them something real. Because the things made with care become the things we return to when we need to remember what care feels like. Wherever you are tonight, whatever brought you here, I hope this gave you somewhere restful to be for a while. If you are new here, leave a like on this video. It takes 1 second and it genuinely makes a difference. And if you have not subscribed yet, hit that button. New videos like this one take a long time to make, and your subscription is what makes them possible. Now let it all be quiet. You can close your eyes. Appa is flying somewhere above the clouds, great and slow and steady, the wind moving through that impossible white fur, and Aang is asleep on his back, and the stars are out, and the world below is still full of things that need doing. But right now, for a little while, you do not have to do any of them. You can just be here, in a world someone loved into existence, and let it carry you.